back, everyone, et re-bienvenue à tous. I hope you enjoyed the break as well as the wonderful conversation with Karen. Alors, pour la prochaine étape de notre sommet, it's now my pleasure to invite Dianne Usher, member of the board of directors at the Canadian Real Estate Association, to the screen to introduce our first panel discussion of the day, which is entitled Constructing Canadian Communities. Dianne, over to you.
Thank you, Karl. The Canadian economy suffered a historic blow as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many industries were devastated in 2020 and 2021 with no realistic short-term hope for recovery. And despite ongoing strength in real estate markets across the country, the pandemic has exacerbated a concerning trend of ongoing shortages in housing supply. Data from Stats Canada and analysis from Scotiabank Economics shows that the rate of home construction relative to the Canadian population has declined since 2016. Canada has the lowest number of housing units per 1,000 residents of any G7 country. The acceleration of house building will not only bring fresh opportunities for the Canadian economy, but it will also help resolve an increasingly problematic trend that we are just not building enough homes to sustain our population growth. Greater collaboration between developers, planners, and all levels of government would ensure new housing supply meets the requirements of growing communities and accelerates the delivery of more quality, sustainable homes. We need to recognize that a shortage of housing supply has led to an increase in housing prices, which is impacting the most vulnerable in our society, including renters, new immigrants, and aspiring homebuyers. Millennials and young families and new Canadians need more housing choice, not further restrictions on financing or new taxes. So far, policies have mostly been designed to suppress household debt, while the root cause of undersupply, including excessive red tape, fees, lack of infrastructure, and coordination among layers of government, have gone largely unaddressed. The Canadian Real Estate Association was pleased to see housing remain a priority for government in the throne speech yesterday. But we are at an important crossroads as a country. Across the entire continuum, supply is low and concern is high. While federal leadership and funding is essential, delivering solutions will require working in consort with stakeholders as well as provinces and municipalities with whom levers and responsibilities fall. The housing crisis is a long way from being solved. There is a need for all levels of government, developers, the construction industry, and all sectors of the real estate industry to work together holistically. A comprehensive national approach should be pursued to identify changes that could increase the responsiveness of supply to demand, with those changes then being implemented aggressively. Yesterday, the throne speech again is committed to economic recovery and rebuilding. Governor General Mary Simon stated that to grow a more resilient economy, the government's plan includes two major priorities: housing and childcare. The government also confirmed their intentions to help families buy their first home sooner with a more flexible first-time home buyers initiative, a new rent-to-own program, and by reducing the closing costs for first-time buyers. The Canadian Real Estate Associations and the realtors across the country have advocated for increasing supply, partnering with other orders of government, and unlocking homeownership will be key to rebuilding a more resilient economy for Canada and its communities. And now it's over to you, Evelyn. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Evelyn to you as our moderator for today for our first panel, Evelyn York. Evelyn has been the head of asset management of Canada Infrastructure Bank, CIB, since November 2020. In this capacity, Evelyn is responsible for managing the growth portfolio of CIB investments. Evelyn, over to you.
Thanks, Diane, and good afternoon, everyone. We have 4 great panelists today for our session, which I will quickly introduce, and then we'll get started. Just for everyone's benefit, we'll have around 35 minutes of discussion and then 10 minutes at the end for a question and answer period. Our first panelist is Matt Wickham, who is Cogeco Connections Vice President and General Manager for Ontario, which comprises 2/3 of Cogeco Connections business in Canada. He leads a team of more than 800 dedicated customer service, marketing, and sales professionals, all passionately focused on delivering exceptional service to customers and communities Cogeco serves. Prior to joining Cogeco, Matt held several senior roles in other telecom companies with expertise in retail business transformation and customer service. Our second panelist is Mike Wieninger, PCL's Chief Operating Officer, Canadian Operations, and is responsible for PCL's buildings and civil operations across all provinces. Mike joined PCL in 1996, and in 2016, he joined PCL's Office of the CEO, bringing with him over 25 years of experience in the construction industry, while making significant contributions to the execution of several high-profile projects across Canada. Mike's passion is building successful outcomes for PCL's clients, while influencing a culture of innovation that pushes the Canadian operations forward. Our third panelist today is Francis Pomerleau, Chief Executive National Strategies at Pomerleau. In this role, he leads the national business development, government relations, and reputation management strategies to increase awareness of Pomerleau's value proposition in all Canadian communities. He began his career at Pomerleau in '91 and has held various roles, including Chief Executive, Talent, Culture, and Leadership. He passionately shares the family values of the company and promotes the Pomerleau culture from coast to coast. Our fourth panelist is David Redfern, who is the CEO and President of Lafarge Eastern Canada, a member of the Holcim Group, which is a global leader in innovative and sustainable building solutions. With 20 years experience in over 20 different countries, David brings a wide-ranging and international mindset to construction materials. David and Lafarge Canada are coming together under a new purpose to make cities greener, build smarter infrastructure, and improve communities as they work towards becoming a net zero company. So welcome, everyone. Start off our questions in line with the panel title, Constructing Canadian Communities. It would be good to hear from each of you how you're building Canadian communities in your respective companies. And with that in mind, and with Diane's opening on the impact of the pandemic, how has the pandemic changed planning and construction? And I was wondering, Mike, if you wouldn't mind taking the lead on this one.
Sure. Well, thank you, Evelyn, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Privileged to be here today, so thank you. PCL, just a quick overview of sort of how do we affect building Canadian buildings, or communities, I should say, is that we do all facets of construction and part of both public and private sectors. So lots of hospitals, long-term care, library, rec centers, both, and then also on the civil infrastructures with bridge, roads, those types of things, and also in the high-rise residential as well, so multifamily units. In addition, we have a strong presence also in building renewable. So this is both in solar and wind, and getting into some of the other industrial type like biosolids. So those are areas in which we are continuing to grow and do our work. And obviously in the commercial sector for our private developers, doing lots of work there. And then also touching on retail, which is an interesting one these days. And then also in the industrial market, both not only in Alberta, with that's where our head office is for oil and gas, but obviously the diversification of that sector of work for us as well. So a wide range, and we do operate coast to coast to coast. I'll say that, up north as well. And then with respect to the pandemic and changing planning, I would say from us, we've, I'll talk safety first from the pandemic perspective, is that our industry works already with a safety first culture. So adapting to the pandemic was difficult and challenging, but something that we were used to. So I think the construction industry was able to handle it actually relatively well. Didn't have mass outbreaks. We had isolated incidents of it. And I think the industry in itself actually really moved together to really find right solutions to keep construction moving. And we felt that that was an important, we'll say, win for the industry, also for Canada as well. So I think we were suited for and ready for, I won't say not ready for, but adapted well to the pandemic. One of the things that we would say that really changed was just the movement of workers. So it's one thing that we really evolved and changed because of during the pandemic, working close proximity of others was a problem. Transporting, if you could imagine, up a high-rise tower in a confined elevator, really limiting and having to adapt to really getting people to the places they needed to be to work was certainly a challenge. So I think we've moved forward with that as well. And then also in technology, I think the efficiencies of moving that material and using technologies. And like everybody else, virtual meetings, we certainly did that. It's hard to be virtual when you're actually building construction, but much like we are today, we found a way to do lots of things virtually and be effective that, again, we'll move forward with. Flexibility. One of the things that we looked at is multiple shifts on sites to prevent we'll say multiple people working in certain areas together. So again, with safety in mind with respect to the pandemic. So we did that as well. And then the other one that I will say is construction's built in the field. So one of the things that I would say have driven towards is that we still have a flexible environment, but still our work happens at the workplace. So when getting our people back to work, getting people vaccinated, were top priorities for us. And I think we've done a good job of that. And I think the industry has done a good job of that as well. So that's a quick one, Evelyn. Hopefully that wasn't too much, but that's a quick overview of where we're at.
No, that's helpful. And, those are all, I'm sure even in our organization, the virtual and having to be flexible, I think we're all seeing that in probably all of our companies. Francis, I'll turn it over to you. It would be good to give your overview and as well as, the different aspects that Pomerleau had to implement in this pandemic.
Thank you, Evelyn. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for this great invitation. I would start with this first. I think it's worth mentioning, and Mike touched on it, how amazingly the industry has adapted and showed resilience in the last 2 years. Project never really stopped. Everybody kept working in a safe environment. I think safety is key here. And frankly, honestly, we're never been busier than we are today. I'm not talking about just Pomerleau, but the rest of the industry has been very busy and busier than ever. And I'm sure I could share a number of things that Mike has said. We've shared pretty much the same reality. But looking forward, we're coming out of this pandemic with a new set of risks that we're dealing with that we didn't have before, like supply chain, inflation, labor shortage. This is a new reality. I think these risks are going to be around for a while, and I think everybody agrees that the pre-pandemic world, as we've known it, is not coming back. So keyword is adaptation. Adaptation helped us get through the pandemic, but we'll probably need all the more adaptation in the future. So just talking about supply chain, it's a just-in-time integrated economy. Just a small disruption in this supply chain creates a butterfly effect. When it works, it worked, but now there's a number of glitches here and there. It's not just your Christmas toys that are not coming. Construction material is not showing up on job sites. So the worldwide demand is huge. So it's a big concern. So for us, moving forward, if we want to plan ahead, we need to plan more. So it's important for us to have a good mid to long-term view on infrastructure programs. We need to know from governance owners what's coming ahead for the whole industry, the manufacturing industry, to prepare for that more than ever. Then this inflation issue, just in the case of basic commodities such as steel, aluminum, and copper, costs have doubled in the last year. So it's global, it's beyond our control, and just imagine how difficult it is for us to price a project when we have to include all kinds of provision in our submission, and seems the whole value chain is also isolating their own risk. So consequently, overall project costs are increased or hardly predictable, and our industry is exposed to huge risk. So I trust things will stabilize eventually in a year or two. Don't quote me on that, but for now, that is our reality. And finally, the labor shortage. Pre-pandemic, we talked about labor scarcity. Now we're talking about labor shortage. Demography is not helping. Try to find a mason under 55 today. We know that the needs versus the rate of renewal is not there. So I think there's a number of solutions for that to increase the pools, but one of them is investing heavily in new technologies, innovation, and to be more productive. I think we need to do more with less labor, like other industries have done before, and that's one key solution. Other solutions are to face the huge demand is to be more agile and delivery modes, allow flexibility in alternative material, include indexation clauses based on commodity prices and contracts. I think it needs to happen. Better allocation of sharing of risk, and get us involved as early as possible in the process. I think it's one thing. And but anyway, it's a new world, and adaptation is key here.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good point, adaptation. And you've highlighted the risks fairly well. And, we're all seeing the impacts everywhere. And to your point, I'm sure that getting a building done on time is probably more important than getting your Christmas presents arriving, depending on who you ask. Turning it over to David, it'd be interesting to see kind of your aspects from Lafarge's point of view on how you're building our Canadian communities and how construction has changed for you over the pandemic.
Sure. Again, welcome. Glad to be here, especially with a couple of key customers, Pomerleau and PCL. Nice to share the stage with you. The first thing I'd like to just mention, like Mike and Francis, was around safety. And I really do think not only did we work through the pandemic, but I think we were a very good influence on how to manage the pandemic. I think a lot of our employees went and learned very good strategies and tips from being at work and shared those in their communities. I know Mike at PCL was very in the forefront of vaccination policy too, and very positive on some of the things you did there. So I think that's just as a community leadership and safety through the pandemic, I don't think we can undervalue that. Francis mentioned supply chain. So Lafarge is the #1 construction material supplier of cement, aggregates, and ready mix. And the pandemic has put challenges on this supply chain. Really 3 key pieces that we're working on right now. #1 is people. The baby boom ended in 1964. These people are aging out, and we are significantly relying on those people. So that is a push. Getting people interested in being in our industry and having the right skills is huge. So just from a people perspective, our industry has a big lift ahead, and that's one thing we're focusing on, is training and managing that. The next piece, as Francis said, was just the supply chain. I think 2022 is when we're really going to start to feel the big pinch. I think we were all surprised when we went into the pandemic how easily we initially managed it. The move online, the supply chain seems to hold up. But I think now the strains are being felt, and I think we're really going to have some challenges moving into 2022. The third piece is just building capacity right now. We need to build capacity for a growing country, and whether that's cement plants, ready mix facilities, or aggregate permits, we're working on those just to develop the capacity to supply companies such as PCL and Pomerleau the materials they need in a timely and cost-effective fashion. The last piece I really want to mention that's really changed both within Lafarge and the Wholesome Group and out in the public is the whole question of sustainability has really risen to the forefront. And one of the things that's changed for us is at my month-end process now, I'm not only looking at financial results, I'm looking at sustainable results. I'm looking at my CO2 intensity, my water intensity, my circularity. And the amount of time that I'm spending as a leader on this question now versus 2 years ago is immense. And I think it's something that we're going to talk about later. Final thing, biggest change is just the acceleration of going online. We've been able to go pretty well paperless in our ready mix dispatch and delivery over the pandemic. And a lot of that was pushed by the pandemic. And I think with Matt speaking next, I think it's really something that is going to explode further as we move forward.
Great, thanks, David. And with that, perfect segue for Matt to talk from Cogeco. So I'll just pass it on.
Thanks, Evelyn. And yeah, David, that you're right. I mean, for us, when we think about actually building communities, what we think about more than anything really is how do you close that digital divide? I mean, typically in the telecom sector, especially those that are building out high-speed internet, would really double down and focus in on those major metropolitan areas, where the rural areas, the smaller communities were typically ignored or at least underserved. For us, the pandemic, it was a game changer for us. Obviously, the need, the desire, the essential component of high-speed internet became obvious to everybody, and so we started to really double down and starting to focus in on those areas that really require high-speed internet. There's so many different trends that the pandemic actually drove, right? I mean, like the work from home, the school from home, the virtual healthcare, and now this new trend of people actually moving out of the more dense areas in the country and moving into smaller communities. Without internet infrastructure, the communities that you guys are building, quite frankly, won't really grow. They won't thrive. Small communities across the country make up about 30% of the GDP, and without high-speed internet, a reliable high-speed internet that's really fiber-based, you really just won't be able to get there. So that's what we were crucially struck by how important our market is, our products are, where it used to be seen as something that was almost a luxury to have high-speed internet connectivity. Now, if we actually want to grow these economies in the communities that you guys are building, without having it, we won't be able to do it without having a high-speed internet. So that's really how Cogeco thinks about it. Our markets are really focused in on those smaller communities. We don't actually operate in like the Torontos of the world. We operate in those smaller communities, and we're faced with a lot of the same sort of challenges that I think your industry is faced with, which is finding labor, dealing with supply chain, and constructing quick enough our infrastructure to be able to support these communities. So that's how we kind of think about it, Evelyn.
Great, thank you. That was insightful. I know we've talked about kind of how the pandemic has shifted, the kind of the mindset and technologies in the sector. But looking forward, hopefully this kind of normalizes, knock on wood, over the next couple of years, and supply chain comes back. Looking forward 10, 15, 20 years, and we've touched on it a bit, but where do you see the sector going? And, if I can ask too, how will you push to this net zero impact? And I'll start with Francis. I don't know if you're going to talk about your automated dogs on your site, but I figured, what a way to start, and where will that lead you in the next decade or two?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not here with me, but sure you'll see it on the internet. But I would say, the construction industry will, talking about our industry, it will probably change more in the next 5 to 10 years than it has in the last 4 or 5 decades. It's clear we're in the process of major transformation, and as major players like Pomerleau, PCL, and others, we need to drive this change in our industry. I come from a family business in construction, and I've witnessed big changes in the last few decades in my lifetime. Growing up as a child, my father would hand a roll of drawings to a superintendent and tell him, go build this. And he would go and build a building. And without the tools that we know today, without a computer, even a phone, let alone a phone. So that's how things were done in those days, in brick and mortars. And actually those buildings are still there today and very solid. But when we look at construction today, we're a long way from that. Lots of change in the last 30, 40 years. but it's nothing to compare with what's happening today and what's ahead of us. So today our industry is way more complex and sophisticated, of course, and we're more than just doers. Companies like ours and PCL are involved at all stages of a project, from concept to realization, from financing to maintenance, and of course the delivery modes have changed accordingly. But coming back to your question, what's going to change? What's going to happen in the next few years? I see three major changes coming. First one being innovation and technology, of course. We've been lagging behind in terms of innovation and productivity in our industry. Now we're pretty much into virtual construction, digitization, BIM, and I think these tools are the point zero of a number of other new tools and innovation. And talking about robotics, you've seen our robotic dog. Prefabrication, modular construction, self-operating equipment, 3D printing, building maintenance. This is not science fiction, it's happening. And I think we're just at the stone age of that. Another big change that we're seeing in our industry is sustainable construction. It's a well-known fact that we're a big polluter. We burn lots of gas, we produce a huge amount of waste, and we end up building energy hungry buildings. We've done that for too long. I think we can do better. The industry wants to be part of the solution, and more companies like ours are becoming net zero, switching their fleet to electric, changing some practices to be more sustainable. And also the supply chain is adapting with new material, local sourcing, and David talked about it. And most owners, as you know, they're changing their requirements to net zero, and they want to build their own sustainable buildings and infrastructure. So, and the other thing I see coming in our industry, like everywhere else, is diversity and inclusion. I think society is changing, and we need to lead those changes in our industry, which has been traditional for too long. And we must look like the rest of the society in terms of diversity. And it's a good thing in terms of, in the context of labor shortage, to have to increase our pool of good people to work in the industry. But as far as we are concerned at Pomerleau, we're of course embracing these changes, and we want to drive those transformations and want to see them happen.
Great, thank you. I'll now turn it out. I'll mix it up a little bit. Mike at PCL, how are you looking at kind of the future and net zero impact?
I would say similar to what Francis, I'll try not to repeat, because many of the things that Francis said really certainly apply to PCL as well. A few things that come to mind is there's been over the last 5 years, and will continue on, as a massive investment in technology in construction. And a lot of that has been towards better efficiencies with respect to tools and management tools. In addition to that, where we see, we'll say, a greater evolution will happen into more of the robotics. Francis talked about Spot, the robotic dog. We're actually working with Francis actually on a project and doing a joint venture where we're actually putting technology on the dog. And what it does is it does walk around sites. It does actually the work of a person, essentially. And when we're in this market of labor, we'll say labor uncertainty and not having enough people in there, we're going to have to transfer some of that working person power into robotic power to help offset some of the, we'll say, needs for people in the future. So that is going to be, we'll say, I would say, an ever-growing impact in the next 5, 10, 20 years. When we look at that part, with respect to sustainability, certainly getting to the net zero embodied carbon. I know David and Lafarge are certainly leaders in the industry with respect to finding solutions to reduction of greenhouse gases during the production, and looking at alternative materials for building, because building isn't stopping. It's going to go forward, so we have to be as efficient as we can. So when you look at embodied carbon, that to me is the next phase of evolution of sustainability for the construction industry, is in how do we become more efficient? And we can certainly do that through the technology tools. So whether it's in transportation, mining the materials for it, production of the materials, or even alternative materials as well that are, we'll say, emit less greenhouse gases. So that's where we see the production. I certainly agree with Francis with respect to diversity and inclusion as well. We have to find labor, and we got to use all facets of it. And the construction industry is old, and it is moving forward and advancing on a, I would say, a more DE&I front, which I think will take time, but it's moving, which is great.
Great, thanks. So then I'll turn it over to David, and I was doing some digging on the Lafarge website as well, and the embodied carbon and the upcycling of materials, pretty interesting. So I'll turn it over to you.
So I think one of the interesting things is, how we define best, and our objectives are becoming a lot broader. When people are looking at projects, it's not just performance, it's not just cost, but now these sustainability metrics are starting to enter the equation. So I think that really does drive change, and those metrics on what best is can include social metrics, et cetera. So how we look and make decisions is really, really changing. The other piece that I think is interesting is the whole technology piece. And what we're seeing now, and I think it's going to snowball, is the potential to integrate data up and down the supply chain. Traditionally, our industry has been relatively slow to adapt technology, simply because of the dynamic nature of the business, the local nature of the business, et cetera. And that really does two things. It really highlights an opportunity now for those who can do this. I also think the alignment of that data up and down the supply chain won't only drive efficiencies, it will also start to open up the paths to find solutions on some of the sustainability questions as well. So really, when we look at our business, we look at the financials, but we're really starting to really key in on those sustainability questions, those digital questions, but most importantly, how we measure success. It's easy to say we want to be sustainable. What does that mean? How did Mike and Francis and I speak to that? And right now, one of the big things that we've done is we started to put EPDs together on all our products, environmental product declarations that state how much CO2 is in our products, how much circularity is there. And I think that is really the next step as we put new measures out there to work together.
Great. This sounds exciting. I'm going to ask Matt a question, and the others feel free to chime in if you want to add additional comments. But how are you looking at the sector and adapting new technologies and pushing innovation? And how is telecoms and broadband infrastructure playing a new key role in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. So for us, as we push out into new communities that are further afield, it really has forced us to rethink, kind of reimagine actually how we bring our products and services to market. We're partnering with all levels of government right now, and over the next 18 months, we'll build out to about 225 new communities that are further, like I say, further afield than we've ever been. So we have to think through how we digitize our business, how we make it easier for customers to actually get in touch with us, but how we actually get the services out to them. So whether that's through new self-install procedures, whether that's using artificial intelligence to anticipate and other new tools to anticipate when we're seeing infrastructure issues that will start to congest our network. We're looking at all of these things. What we have to do in the telecoms sector in particular has to get way more proactive than we've been in the past. Typically, we wait for problems to come to us. As we get further, as our infrastructure builds, our network builds, wider and wider and into more remote communities, we need to now get far more proactive on how we actually continue to build out these communities. I mean, we use the word anticipate a lot more than we used to, which is, how do we partner with construction companies, with developers to really understand where those new areas are going, so we can actually start building prior to the construction of housing, because in our world, digging through rock to lay fiber is an unbelievably expensive and time-consuming process. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot about far more proactivity, far more digitization, and trying to anticipate where we need to be.
Great, thanks. We have a few more minutes left until we head into our Q&A sessions. Does anyone want to add to that, or have any other comments on new technology?
I can certainly say that if in companies like ours, we have the means to invest and develop new technologies, but we can't be alone doing that and using these new gears and tools. It's important that the rest of the industry works together and in a way to elevate the whole category. I'm the only one using one tool and the rest of the industry is not using it, it's worthless. So it's good to see that many are doing so. And thanks, Mike, for raising the opportunity that we have to work together, Pomerleau and PCL, to exchange best practices and technologies for the benefit of the industry, and set aside competition for a while to do that. I think everybody's winning, and that the industry has to change together and elevate the whole category at the same time. I think it's important.
Evelyn, if I could, I'm just going to add one quick thing to Francis' comment, which is a really good one, and that is, rowing and sinking together. And I'll say, we probably 7 years ago, we had started a modular operation and trying to really put modular solutions together in anticipation of this. And it was a real struggle. There were some successes out of it for sure, and we're seeing some industries that are being successful with it. But in many cases, lots of the issues arose because design communities weren't ready, or ownership communities weren't ready with respect to building an efficient model with a modular solution to begin with. So to that point, it was a tough lesson learned for us with respect to how to do it properly. So there are opportunities out there, but we absolutely have to do this in unison for it to be successful.
Just picking up on that, the strategic partnership piece is key for innovation, both in sustainability and efficiency. The other piece that really has changed for us is just our interactions with the startup world. Right now, on digital, on sustainability, we probably have about 15 different relationships ongoing, from pilots to execution, where we're taking ideas from the startup world and really operationalizing them in our business. So that is a critical success factor, our ability to find, work, and operationalize some of these ideas from the outside.
So David, perfect segue into our first Q&A question that's come through. And someone in the audience has asked, how much should a construction company, and this can be applied to all of these companies, allocate to innovation technology when creating a yearly budget?
Well, if I can answer,
Yeah.
Here's what we're doing. At Pomerleau, we have over 150 people involved in innovations. We have our own lab, our acceleration lab, research and development lab, where we monitor new technologies and try the right one that will help our operation, our industry, and also bring value to a project. We also have tools for rapid implementation within the company, and we create our own training center and to make sure that these new innovations people are being trained. So what we've done is, we've tried to shorten, cut in half or in three, the time it takes from R&D implementation to training and deployment and operation. So it's a lot, but I think it pays off, and it's a number of people involved. It's important.
For us, we have a traditional R&D lab based in Lyon, France. We also have developed a digital group now that has a startup component to it that engages. But I think the piece that's always forgotten in this is how you integrate it in the business. Most of the innovations don't fail because they're not a good ideas. Lots of good ideas. It's how you integrate it into the industry, your customers, your vendors, your personal processes, your people's skill sets, etc., your data sets. And everyone comes up with these great technologies or ideas, but it's embedding it in the business. And the amount of time that we're now spending on that integration process with our general team is huge. And it's an investment that doesn't show up directly on the bottom line. But if I look at people going right down to my plant managers at cement plants, the amount of time they're spending every day on innovation is vastly accelerated, and really over the last few years has been a real challenge and exciting too for people in the field.
Great, thanks.
Not much to add other than, you know, we spend millions of dollars on digital technology and moving forward with it, and we spend a lot on it. No set budget otherwise, but we certainly have a program in place when great ideas come forward that we look at it with a hard-nosed look to see what value it brings, and then we invest appropriately to develop it. So that's probably the best way to answer it from our perspective.
Thanks. And Matt, is it fair to assume in the digital broadband world that, you know, it's a large component as well?
Yeah, it's a huge component for us in terms of how we actually, as I said earlier, how we digitize our business and especially when we start to think about also branching out into other lines of business where how we combine our existing lines with mobile, for instance, the amount of R&D work that we'll have to do to prepare for something like that is somewhat daunting, quite frankly.
Imagine. Thanks. Another question from a participant: are we seeing the demand for sustainability more in big smart cities or in small areas as well? And is the demand more in commercial or residential?
So I can go first. Everyone wants sustainable products. Very few people are willing to pay for them at this time. So if we can give them sustainable at the same price, they're there. Where you are starting to see it come up and is on some of the PPP projects, et cetera. You're starting to see a component of the award being based on sustainability. But I think one of the big challenges right now for us as an industry, if we really want to move the needle on this, is really change some of the rules, start putting some of those metrics in place that recognize sustainability in the procurement process, but also start to open up some of the specifications to more performance-based specifications rather than prescriptive-based, for us to come up with new ways to provide sustainable solutions at more effective price.
Well, sustainability is probably the trendiest word around these days, especially after COP26, and everybody wants to have that. And it's funny because on one side, the industry is ready for that and ready to deliver that. The owners want that. What needs to be adjusted is the delivery method to achieve that. I think if you drive everything to the lowest bidder and to the lowest denominator, it's not going to work. I think you need to allow delivery methods that are more collaborative. That we're talking about technology innovation, diversity and inclusion, sustainable construction, and all. You need to have the right delivery mode that will allow the industry to bring its value and creativity to those projects. But I think we're close to that. But I agree with David. Everybody wants it, but not everybody is willing to pay for it or do what needs to be done to make it happen.
Nothing further to add. It's well said from David and Francis.
Thank you.
And since that was mostly construction related, I'll just pass on that one.
Sounds good. Next question. What is happening? We've talked about the labor shortage. We've kind of touched on this a bit, but are there, and you know, Pomerleau, you've mentioned, or Francis, you've mentioned that Pomerleau has its in-house training program, but someone's asked, what's happening to get more people into these training programs? Are you working with high schools or universities to try to build or help manage the shortage?
Well, I think it's an industry problem. You need to start with, you know, it all goes to immigration, trade schools, you know, valuing these trades also. Not everybody wants to send their kids to be a mason these days, but they're good jobs. They're good high-paying jobs, and that's the good thing about it. It's still very, very attractive. But like I said, there's a demography problem here. So we need to work on all fronts. Governments need to help, trade schools need to help. We need technology and innovation, and to be more productive will help as well. So, like I said, the equation is not really in our favor these days for what's coming ahead.
I'll chime in quickly. I agree with Francis' comments with respect to probably the biggest thing is perception of the industry itself as a dirty industry, and that dirty as in get your hands dirty, by the way. But to be clear, nobody wants to have their kids, or very few people want to have their kids go in. It's always go to university as opposed to go into some of the trades, as Francis. And that's really one of the biggest challenges we see, is just the perception of the industry itself has to change, and government can help with that. I don't think they're doing enough of it. We know associations are doing and trying to, along with the unions and the trades, are trying to actually change that to a degree. We've seen countries where that's been successful. Germany is one of them. Where in the past, where it's a high profile job stream to go into, and that is something that's needed.
Maybe I'll just add something just from our perspective in the telecom sector that might actually be relevant for the construction sector is we see diversity and inclusion as a way of dealing with this as well. It's important for us at Cogeco that our workforce, wherever they happen to be, actually reflects the workforce of the community. And we feel that actually will build a bridge and make us a more attractive employer, make the sector, quite frankly, more attractive to people that haven't traditionally gone into technology or whatnot.
I think that's a great point, by the way. When we look at women in construction, it's between 10 and 15%. So elevating it, there's a whole sector and there's a whole group of women that could be part of the construction industry and valuable and bring a great set of skills to the industry that can totally improve it. So it's a missing area for us, for sure.
The only thing I'd add to that is the whole idea of being a purpose-led business, to really talk about the change that is happening in the construction industry and the contributions that people can make here. Now, we are a big part of the challenge of sustainability. Where the solutions are going to be found is within this industry, and we have to switch people's thought process from seeing us as the enemy of some of these sustainable issues, and to be where the solutions are going to be found. So I really think there's a piece the industry can do as a group to really present ourselves that way, because it's not just attracting people to the trades, it's attracting people to the business, period.
Thanks, David. Those are all great points, and I'd love to continue the conversations and questions, but unfortunately we're up for time. I just want to thank all of you again for your insights. I'm now going to turn it over to Peter Vogel. Peter is the Director of Business Development at Otter Energy. Peter, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Evelyn, and thank you to all the panelists for an excellent discussion. Also, a thank you to the Canadian Chamber for organizing this executive summit, and also to our MC today, Karl. As Evelyn mentioned, my name is Peter Vogel, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Otter Energy. Our company's focus is on developing, installing, and managing distributed clean energy projects, namely solar and battery storage. for clients and communities across multiple provincial markets. So it's from this perspective on the energy side that I'd like to offer a few closing thoughts on the first half of today's program. When we talk about the implications of moving towards net zero, in our mind, there's no realistic path to that level of deep decarbonization that does not involve the build out of a clean power sector. And there's no path to a clean power sector that does not substantially involve deploying solar, wind, and storage at scale. It's really these technologies that will power the broad multi-sector decarbonization that is going to be essential to achieving our net zero objectives. If we can make power clean and keep it cheap and reliable, it really becomes the key to unlocking a number of other deep decarbonization pathways, such as, for instance, the electrification of our transport system, which currently accounts for about 25% of global GHG emissions. The decarbonization of our built environment, including not only new buildings and new construction, but existing buildings as well, which currently account for about another 25% of global GHG emissions. The third example is the transition away from fossil fuels in industrial production, and specifically industrial heat, which currently accounts combined for over 20% of global GHG emissions. And I just want to emphasize that, make no mistake, we really are entering the most dynamic and exciting era for infrastructure, I think, since the early 20th century. The path to net zero will really be the greatest, I think, infrastructure undertaking of the past 100 years and really represent a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. As was mentioned in the opening remarks, the construction, transportation, and telecommunications sectors are the workhorses that will ultimately get us to where we must go along this path. Lastly, and most importantly, we do have a fundamental responsibility, all of us here today, to ensure that the transition to a net zero economy creates benefits for all Canadians from all communities across the country. To rise to this challenge ahead with respect to net zero, it's critical that we continue to foster collaboration between the public and private sectors. And to this end, we are grateful for the work that the Chamber does day in, day out to maintain a level of ongoing and constructive dialogue between business and government. So another sincere thank you to the Chamber and to all of today's participants.